Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here today. This is a collaborative project with a graduate student at UCLA, Ravaris Moore, Shi-Song, who's an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Chicago and was a recent UCLA PhD, and your own Yushia. Was he here? No? Okay. So, let's see where this. So this is part of a larger project that Yushia and I have been working on for some time, funded by NIH on what we call heterogeneous treatment effects in demographic research. And the basis of the project is this recognition that an essential feature common to all demographic phenomena is variability across units of analysis. So social and behavioral sciences, sociology, economics, epidemiology, demography. They're population sciences in the sense that they treat individual level variation as a subject of study rather than just a mere nuisance to something to overlook. So individuals differ not only in the pre-treatment characteristics, or the things that kind of govern whether they experience an event or intervention or what we call a treatment, but they also differ in how they respond to a common treatment. And we call this treatment effect heterogeneity. And there's a practical need to overlook some within group, individual level heterogeneity at any time. Social scientists often study particular groups defined by race, by gender, maybe by socioeconomic status. But for scholars interested in causal inference, the heterogeneity, very consequential for thinking about issues of selection, is the probability that individuals are actually experience or receive a treatment. So such treatment effect heterogeneity has important implications for social and behavioral research and for social policy. So if policymakers understand patterns of treatment effect heterogeneity defined by this selection into treatment, they can balance competing objectives, maximize average outcomes, reduce costs, and so forth. And the study of treatment effect heterogeneity can also yield important insights about how scarce resources are distributed in a society, whether people who are unlikely or more likely to experience some kind of intervention or treatment, how those responses differ depending upon that likelihood. And importantly for this topic today, how events differentially impact populations with different expectations of their occurrence. So we described these advantages in an article that we published in 2012 in Sociological Methodology with Yushia and Ben Jan, who's done a lot of our programming for the STATA program on heterogeneous treatment effects. And then as well on a chapter on heterogeneity in Steve Morgan's 2013 volume on causal inference. A student of mine, Julie Simon-Thomas, who's now a fellow at Harvard, and I wrote this piece to describe these approaches that we use. So within this larger project, we have 5 specific aims, which I'm condensing here. So one is to demonstrate heterogeneous treatment effects in demographic research, to develop new statistical methods for estimating heterogeneous treatment effects, to demonstrate that in the presence of heterogeneous treatment effects, the use of standard statistical methods may give rise to treatment effects with compositional biases, depending upon who's actually experiencing the treatment. That governs what kind of average outcomes we observe. To develop a new set of tools to analyze heterogeneous treatment effects in demographic research, and finally, to demonstrate the usefulness of estimating these effects in observational data with propensity score methods, especially with applications to studies of the impact of family level shocks. And it's this final aim that governs the project today that I'm focusing on today. So most of my work on disruptive life events has involved job loss. So this was a paper that I wrote again with my student Julie on job displacement among single mothers and the effects on children's outcomes in young adulthood, and this also took a heterogeneity framework. And so that framework was related to the larger project and to thinking about the impact of family level shocks. And today I'm going to discuss a different type of family level shock, so the effect of parental divorce on children's educational attainment. So that brings me to the current study. So first, some background on the substance of the problem. So as we know, family disruption has long been implicated as a critical shock impacting the lives of children. We know that parental divorce negatively affects children's educational attainment, a large body of work, a lot of Sarah's work that's demonstrated this negative effect on educational attainment, academic achievement in school, social psychological well-being, and so forth. Most of the research on parental divorce focuses on the average effect, kind of implicitly assuming that the divorce is uniformly negative for children. Yet we say there's no a priori reason to expect that children respond in the same ways to a parental divorce. And consequently for this project, that families differ in their expectation of and their ability to adjust to and respond to disruption. So some scholars have questioned the homogeneity assumption or the idea that their divorce is uniformly negative for children. Some studies have looked at differences by race. So there's work that suggested smaller effects for non-white children than for white children, and the negative effects of divorce may be greater for white children who are less accustomed to disadvantaged socioeconomic circumstances and its disruptive events than racial and ethnic minority children, so it might be socioeconomic.
Just a question, I mean, the divorce matters for the kids, that's very understandable, but the question is, what is the counterfactual? Is it just the difference between an intact family and the separated family?
Right.
Or is it, I mean, if people just would live together, but be the same, have conflict at home and so on, it might be better even to have a separation.
Right,
Is the literature separating that? Or?
So we won't in this paper. We're going to look at the effect of divorce, meaning that we compare parents who are still married, whether or not they're living together or co-residing, to parents who's been divorced over the course of a child's life. The family context is another really important piece of this, so how much conflict there is, and we try to kind of model that with this, likelihood of experiencing a divorce. So if there's more, conflict, or there's not as good a match between parents, potentially that there's more conflict, and that indicates a higher likelihood of experiencing the divorce. So family environment is another one that has been implicated. Children's response to divorce may differ depending on the context, the family conflict context. So divorce may offer some relief to a situation when there is a high level of conflict in the family. Married parents with high levels of conflict have been found to be no better off, and in fact may fare worse off in some aspects for children than children of single parents. So we also know that selection bias is a key issue in studying the causal effects of divorce with observational data. So prior research on parental divorce has adopted a range of methods to adjust for selection into parental divorce, and that work in Sarah's article does a really nice job of an annual review article of describing all the different types of models that have been used to assess the effects of parental divorce, adding some measure of robustness to the negative effects that we observe for children. But that research hasn't considered how the effects of divorce relate to selection into divorce. So to detect heterogeneity along the theoretical dimensions for describing the socioeconomic conditions, the family context, and this issue of selection into divorce, a parsimonious approach is the use of a propensity score as predicted by pre-divorce observed covariates. And we expect that low socioeconomic status, low family well-being, that those things predict the likelihood of divorce, so that people with a higher likelihood of experiencing a divorce tend to be those with lower socioeconomic conditions. And that variation in the divorce effect by the estimated propensity then captures this effect heterogeneity of interest, both the substantive interest and this methodological interest about selection into divorce. So what are some hypotheses? We hypothesize that parental divorce will have minimal effect on children who have a high likelihood of experiencing a parental divorce. So divorce among families marked by disadvantage or substantial marital discord may not elicit the same types of negative consequences. The presence of a peer network, possibly, that also has experienced a lot of instability in their lives, may also dampen the social stigma associated with a parental divorce or other means of distress. And then that the effects of divorce will be greatest for children who have a low likelihood of experiencing an event. So families that are expecting marital stability, unprepared for disruption, likely experience considerable adjustment difficulties when divorce occurs, leading to the negative effects on children. And parental divorce may trigger an acute sense of deprivation among children whose peers tend to be likewise more privileged, more advantaged, and for whom family instability is uncommon. So thus far, considering who divorce impacts, then we also want to attend to how divorce exerts its impact. So attention to mediation is central to our understanding of how the effects of parental divorce are transmitted through various potential pathways. So for a mechanism to mediate parental divorce effects on children, it should satisfy two conditions. First, that the mechanism must be influenced by the parental divorce, and then that the mechanism itself must influence children's educational outcomes. And this is just a directed acyclic graph demonstrating those two conditions that must be satisfied for the mediator M to actually serve as a mediating role between divorce and education, children's education. So what are some key mechanisms? So first we're going to consider some family conditions. So family income, unsurprisingly or expectedly, a central mechanism linking parental divorce to children's educational attainment, and it satisfies both conditions of a mediator. So divorce is associated with a decline in family economic resources, with the absence of a parent, typically the father. Tends to be a decline in family economic resources, and it's well known that family income plays a significant role in children's educational attainment. Another potential mechanism is family instability or family transitions, remarriage, further divorce, union dissolution, cohabitation, and so forth subsequent to the initial divorce. And we know that condition 1 is satisfied, that divorce is associated with increased family instability, and also that condition 2 is satisfied, family instability has been shown to lower children's educational attainment. So the importance of these two family conditions is clear. We know a little less regarding their relative weight in the association between parental divorce and children's education, particularly among families with different likelihoods of experiencing the event. Two additional potentially important mechanisms include two measures of children's skills that we're going to consider: children's cognitive skills and their psychosocial skills. For children's cognitive skills, let me begin with condition 2. So we know that cognitive skills impact educational attainment, status attainment, human capital models, a long tradition of demonstrating this link. Condition 1 is more problematic here. So between person variation in cognitive skills becomes relatively stable by early childhood, such that we shouldn't expect family disruptive events to play a big role in their development, at least past the really early childhood years. We were really interested in children's psychosocial skills, also called by various names: non-cognitive skills, socio-emotional skills, personality traits, cultural capital. Psychosocial skills encompass a broad class of attitudes and behaviors that are correlated with but distinct from cognitive skills. So things like emotional stability, self-esteem, conscientiousness, good behavior, control over environment, aspirations, and so forth. Some recent research has treated children's psychosocial and cognitive skills as parallel or symmetrical outcomes of family disruption. We instead maintain that the development literature points to important asymmetry between the development of these types of skills. So for children's psychosocial skills for condition 1, they evolve and change. So psychosocial skills have been shown to evolve and change throughout childhood, allowing family disruptive events to play a considerable role in their development, and some evidence of family disruption on children's psychosocial skills. And for condition 2, a growing body of research, notably by Jim Heckman and others, has demonstrated that children's psychosocial skills are critical predictors of children's education. So what we want to do is understand the degree to which these skills account for the association between parental divorce and children's education, and how that compares to the family conditions that we're considering, and how this mediation process differs across families. So we think that these three will be more pivotal given the issue with condition 1 for children's cognitive skills. So to summarize, the study is motivated by 2 aims. We assess how the effects of parental divorce vary across families with varying likelihoods of disruption. Through examining heterogeneity and the effects of divorce by the observed propensity that a child experiences a parental divorce, we try to shed new light on subpopulations for whom the effects of divorce may be considerable, moderate, or even absent. Once we determine how the total effects vary across families, we assess the mechanisms or the indirect effects through which parental divorce affects children's education. Throughout the study, we try to carefully attend to the assumptions and the methods necessary to estimate both the total effects of divorce and these indirect or mediating effects. Mechanisms explaining the effects of divorce have long been talked about, conjectured, estimated, but fewer studies have paid very careful attention to the causal mediation process and assessing the effects, especially across these different types of families. So the data come from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, which is a representative sample in the United States of over 12,000 respondents who were 14 to 22 years old when they were first interviewed in 1979. They were interviewed annually through 1994, biannually thereafter. And then we have the National Longitudinal Survey of Surveys Child Mother File, which is a separate survey of the children of NLSY women who began being interviewed in 1986 and have been interviewed every other year since then. So as of 2012, the roughly 6,000 women of the NLSY had given birth to about 11,500 children. The women were 47 to 54 years old in 2012. We merged the data on the women from the NLSY to the children of the NLSCM, such that children become our units of analysis, and then we restrict to children who are born into marriage and to children who are at least 18 years old by 2012, so we can observe at least their high school completion. To evaluate the effects of parental divorce on children's education, we adopt a potential outcome approach. Think about the counterfactuals. Ask whether a child whose parents had divorced had different outcomes than that child would have experienced had their parents not been divorced. We condition the key to the identification strategy is of course this what we call ignorability assumption that parental divorce is an event uncorrelated with unobserved factors that affect children's outcomes, which of course, particularly in this case, is a very strong assumption. So what we try to do is condition on an extensive set of observed covariates, characteristics, so maternal socio-demographic characteristics, race, national origin, family background, residential location, family structure, religion, their parents' education, this would be like the grandparents of the children, parents' income, family size, maternal, cognitive and psychosocial skills and well-being, that's academic achievement in high school, cognitive ability, educational encouragement, locus of control, Perlin mastery, Rosenberg self-esteem, delinquency, CSD, BMI, relationship, maternal socioeconomic status as adults, so that's education, employment status, job conditions, poverty, welfare status, delinquency, relationship quality between parents at the time of child's birth, whether parents argue about chores, money, cheating, religion, whether they match with respect to education, religion, race, and then relationship and fertility characteristics, early sexual activity, beliefs about traditional family roles, age at the time of child's birth, prior marriages, time between marriage and first birth, desirability of the birth of a child, given how many children they said they wanted and how many they actually had, and child's gender and so forth. So although Ravaris, my students, spent several years trying to develop this model, it's not to say that we believe that this completely predicts who will experience a parental divorce and who may not. Families self-select into divorce for all sorts of reasons that we can't fully observe. So the mediators that we're considering are total family income, and then family transitions is a count of the number of times the transition occurs between the states of married, separated, remarried, widowed, cohabitating. Of course, for that indicator, for the parents who haven't experienced a parental divorce, they can just move from married to separated to married, or they don't have the other possibilities for transitions. Cognitive skills are constructed by averaging 3 Peabody individual achievement tests: reading comprehension, reading recognition, and math. Psychosocial skills have constructed with 5 indicators, Perlin 5 scales. Actually, Perlin mastery, Rosenberg self-esteem, emotional stability, behavioral problems, and depressive symptoms, CSD. We tried in each of these cases looking at scales individually, the indicators individually, to see if we learned anything further than just using this more parsimonious set of indicators, and ultimately went with what was more parsimonious with little loss of information. A few additional comments on the mediator construction. So all mediators are constructed with the values averaged over the period after the child experiences a parental divorce. For the kids whose parents did not divorce, there's no natural event time. So what we do is match, by the propensity to experience a divorce, match child who's divorced, whose parents divorced, to a child whose parents didn't divorce, and then simulate an observed event time for the child whose parents did not divorce. And then the outcomes include high school completion by age 18, college attendance by age 19, college completion by age 23, so timely completion of each of these educational outcomes. And then to estimate total effects, so the analytical approach begins with the estimation of the propensity for parental divorce based on that set of factors that we considered. It's a logit regression model, simply just predicting whether or not child experiences a parental divorce. And then we estimate an average treatment effect conditional on that observed propensity using linear probability models. And next, now we want to think about how we estimate heterogeneous effects. So how do we go about this? So we want to assess whether the effects of divorce vary with the propensity for parental divorce. And as I said, we think this has both substantive and methodological value, as we can interpret effect variability partially as selection into the treatment by unobserved selectivity if we see different effects across these strata. And so we adopt 2 approaches based on the work that showed earlier, the article with Yushia and Ben-Jan on estimating heterogeneity under the ignorability assumption. So the first is a matching smoothing non-parametric approach. And what we do is we estimate those propensity scores for each child in the sample, and we match the treated units, those whose parents divorced, to the untreated, to those children whose parents didn't divorce, using a matching algorithm. And then we actually plot those differences between the treated and non-treated and their effects, plot their effects for those educational outcomes along a continuous representation of the propensity score, and then do a local polynomial smoothing and see how the effect varies across that propensity for experiencing the event. So fit a non-parametric smooth curve to the trend and the match differences as a function of the propensity score, and that'll tell us the kind of direction of the effect. If there appears to be effect heterogeneity by this approach, we move to a parametric approach where we stratify the cases into groups based on their propensity for experiencing a parental divorce. So then we have specific strata by which we estimate effects separately. And that's a strata-specific total effect of divorce. These approaches can be used with this data. This is my advertisement, so that you too can do this if you so desire. HTE is our program that we've used to generate these results. So estimating now, the final step is that we want to estimate mediation effects and estimate heterogeneous mediation effects. So mediation methods using a potential outcome framework have expanded dramatically in the last several years. The idea is that a causal mediation analysis is designed to estimate the role of mechanisms in transmitting the effect of a treatment on an outcome. And this potential outcome approach provides a framework. It's a conceptual framework for clarifying the assumptions needed to estimate valid mediation effects. So the mediation or indirect effect reflects one potential pathway through which the treatment produces the effect on the outcome of interest. So to identify mediation effects, we now need to assume sequential ignorability, not just ignorability, but sequential ignorability, that the treatment is assumed to be independent of potential outcomes and of the potential mediators. So this is just now a directed acyclic graph demonstrating the full model, the propensity for treatment, the treatment, parental divorce, the 4 different mechanisms that we're describing, and those educational outcomes. So we're going to let M denote the potential value of the mediator that would be realized under a treatment status D. Only the potential mediator that corresponds to the actual received treatment is observed in the same way that we describe when we think about total effects. Using this kind of notation, we can define the total effect here. And this is just the same effect that I'm defining earlier, but now with explicit attention to the form the mediator makes whenever you're estimating that kind of total effect. And then we can estimate causal mediation, indirect or indirect effects of the treatment on the outcome through the mediating variables. So the mediation effect shows what change would occur to the outcome if the mediator changed from what would be observed when units were treated to when units are untreated, holding the treatment status a D. And the idea is that we deactivate all the other potential pathways and focus on that specific mediator. So the mediation effect may, for example, explain the degree to which parental divorce impacts high school completion by decreasing children's psychosocial skills. And then we have, to get at finally this heterogeneous mediation effect, we have stratum-specific causal mediation effects conditioned by the propensity for divorce. And nicely, we get this proportion mediated. So we can say what proportion of the total effect is mediated by each of these particular mechanisms. So that's just the proportion of the mediation effect to the total effect. Yeah?
Can I just ask one question? So when you're doing the mediation, are you controlling for all the other possible mediators?
No.
It's kind of the maximum than any particular?
Well, where'd it go? No, I just showed you all the results. No, so potentially that could be something to do because we do want to adjust for things that bias the relationship between the mediator and outcome, and the other mediators are potentially some of those factors that could. The way we construct these, though, is that they're post-divorce factors, and they vary across all these different time periods. So you could get something that was happening post-mediator and trying to serve as a control, and then that's problematic. So in this case, we didn't do that. So that the ignorability assumption may be violated, the sequential ignorability assumption may be violated as well. We're controlling for all these pre-treatment characteristics in both the total and mediating effects. Okay, so the sensitivity analysis, this provides this framework for because we think that there might be violations, we're looking at a framework for investigating the extent to which the estimated effects are sensitive to unobserved covariates. So we're trying to quantify how the results would change if we relaxed these ignorability assumptions. And you use these different thresholds to determine, how big the factor would have to be, how much influence would it have to have to invalidate the results that we see. And we can do this for the total effects and for the mediating effects by subtracting a bias factor. And the bias term is a product of these two components. Gamma would be like the mean difference in children's education associated with the unit change in the unobserved confounder. And lambda then is the mean difference in the unobserved confounder between the children of divorced and non-divorced parents. Both then are conditional on our propensity for divorce. And then that bias term is just subtracted from the total effect and the limits of the confidence interval. Okay, so the first set of results are the propensity score model results. So we are predicting the likelihood that a child experiences a parental divorce. And here I'm just summarizing what we found in that large model. So things that you would generally expect that increase the odds of a parental divorce: maternal low academic achievement in high school, cognitive ability and low self-esteem, maternal non-intact family, low adult socioeconomic status, high levels of depressive symptoms and body mass index, maternal employment at the time of child's birth, particularly in a private firm, parents arguing about chores, parents who differ in their educational attainment and who are of different races, early sexual debut, prior marriages, mothers not holding traditional family values by that indicator, then else why, that the child was undesired, again by that indicator. Two factors that potentially are unexpected that decrease the odds of divorce: parents arguing about money. Maybe that's therapeutic. Parents raised in different religions, and again, we thought maybe that's selected. If you're going to have different religious beliefs, you got to have a strong union that will withstand those different opinions. Okay, so yeah.
I have a question about how well are you able to actually predict who will be divorced or not? So if you can't predict the propensity scores well, then it's kind of
I forget what the values. It's not that high, but I think it was pretty comparable to what we can do for things like college attendance and other pretty selective, processes. So it's not terrible with this model, but it's not great.
Related question while we're on that. How's the balance in the how well does the propensity score balance the retreatment coverage?
Yeah, I think once we go to the strata, we look at the balance, at the tails of the distribution, and I think there might have been a handful of cases that were discarded due to lack of balance, but not many. So I think it was reasonably well.
Are you looking at, you have a lot of retreatment things, are you looking at the joint distribution at all, or is it all univariate?
For
assessing balance.
Oh, yeah, no, the joint.
Okay.
Yeah. So and we do that by looking at the propensity score strata too, how much overlap or support is within each of the strata. Okay, so these are the first total effects, the linear probability estimates of the effects of divorce on children's educational attainment. So these are now just the simple zero order estimates without control for the likelihood of divorce. And so we observe that divorce is associated with an 8 percentage point lower level of high school completion, 12 for college attendance, 11 for college completion. And so we're seeing about 82% of children who complete high school whose parents are not divorced, and 75% whose parents divorced, 57 whose parents are not divorced who attend college versus 45 whose parents divorced, and for college completion, 24 versus 13. Then we adjust for the likelihood of a parental divorce occurring for the propensity score, and the coefficients are roughly half the magnitude, but still significant in each of the indicators of educational attainment. Now here, 4 percentage point lower level, 6 and 6% lower level of college completion. So then we turn to the heterogeneous effect estimates, and this is the matching smoothing non-parametric model. So the x-axis again represents the continuous value of the propensity score, and the y-axis represents the observed differences between those matched pairs. And here we've eliminated the scatter plot just to see the trend and the effect, and we observe this kind of curvilinear pattern where we see a negative effect of parental divorce on children's high school completion for those with a low to moderate likelihood of experiencing divorce, an effect that reaches 0 near the high end of it and has this kind of tail at the very high end of the likelihood of divorce.
Do you have a sense of the amount of uncertainty about the estimates at each point? Like, I don't know how much of the data is in different ranges or.
Well, yeah, we don't have confidence bounds on this trend. We could do that when we look at the parametric approach, which in this case now we don't actually fit a trend to the parametric approach. We just look at the different effect estimates by the strata. Sure. Probably, I mean, at the tails, you're going to find the fewest cases, of course. So you might want to think about starting the trend line a little further in. Yeah, definitely at the tails is where there's at least, especially this. So
that's what I was going to
and I tried to actually eliminate some of those. It still kind of pushed itself up, but maybe not as far. Yeah, so that tail seems like driven by some handful of cases. So for college attendance, we have this kind of irregular pattern, yet still a general trend towards negative effects for the low and moderate likelihood of experiencing divorce, and to roughly 0 effect for those with a high likelihood of divorce. For college completion, we have, or each of these has different patterns, but generally indicate the same kind of substantive story, that we have a negative effect for those with a low to moderate likelihood of divorce to 0 effect for those with a high likelihood. So we then turn to the parametric effect estimates by propensity score strata. So given the shape of those response functions and to preserve cases, particularly at the tails of the distribution, we use 3 strata, 3 propensity score strata. And so we have, let me just get this off. We have stratum 1 where divorce is least likely, stratum 2 divorce moderately likely, stratum 3 divorce most likely. And as we see here for high school completion, we have a marginally significant effect at stratum 1 of divorce least likely, and for stratum 2 5 percentage point lower level of high school completion, and no effect for those who are the most likely to experience the parental divorce. In this case, these are the most advantaged children, and so you almost expect high school completion to be pretty ubiquitous among that group, but you still see it just kind of a marginally significant difference. And then for college attendance, similar kind of pattern here for the stratum 1 for the divorce least likely, a 9 percentage point lower level, 7, and again no effect for the children who are most likely.
Are these strata like equal width, or are they equal sample sizes?
They're not exactly equal, and they were constructed such that, so usually the way our method works is that we construct strata based on whether there's no significant differences between each of the covariates and the propensity score, and then it determines how many strata to produce based on that search mechanism. We did that and then had, I think it was 6 strata, and the tails were smaller, as they often are, so we combined the groups at the at stratum 1 and stratum 3, let's say, and made it so that we have these 3 strata. So I think they're roughly similar across now, these 3. You know, it's not that they're very different because we combined across these different values. And then we further adjust for the propensity score when we do so, since there are significant differences between the values. Okay, so that was college attendance. College completion, 10%, as we would expect given that linear trend. The highest effect at stratum 1, stratum 2, and again, no effect for those most likely to experience the divorce. We might notice here that children in the divorce groups, or parents divorced for college completion, have a 24% college completion rate. If we looked at parents not divorced, for stratum 3, they have a 12% college completion rate. So that we still have, among those people with a low likelihood of experiencing divorce, who have more advantaged socioeconomic conditions and other factors, they're still completing college in higher rates than those who have intact families with lower socioeconomic conditions. So intact family status doesn't seem to supersede these other types of characteristics. Okay, so then we want to look at the mediation effects. And so each mediator is assessed in turn, so there's no summing to 100% here. Each of them gets assessed one at a time. So this is family income, which is going to be the story of the day. That family income has the strongest effect, mediating the effects of parental divorce on children's education among these children whose parents had a low to moderate likelihood of experiencing divorce. So what we're reporting here is the proportion mediated, just that one value at the end of the slide on that method. And so we need a significant mediation effect and a significant total effect in order to estimate a reasonable proportion mediated. So for stratum 3, we have no significant total effect, so it's just going to say 0 each time because there's no effect to explain in this case. We have, what is that value saying? 78% divorce-induced decline in family income, explaining the effect of divorce on children's education, 92% in the stratum 2, which seems quite high, especially for high school completion. Family instability here has a big mediating role for stratum 2. We didn't see it for stratum 1, and of course not for stratum 3. Cognitive skills, we don't see anything, so no significant mediation effect.
When you say 0, do you mean you estimated 0? Or
No, it's just the way I probably should have covered them up. There's just to show that nothing is happening,
Okay.
but we're not actually estimating anything.
Okay.
Unfortunately. So, yeah, family instability, and cognitive skills, nothing. So there's no significant mediation effect, as we kind of anticipated or hypothesized. And then children's psychosocial skills explain a portion of the effect, but family income really kind of dominates the story here. And so for college attendance, it's going to be a similar type of story. Family income really explaining the majority of the effect, or a large portion of the effect when we assess it. Family instability here, also explaining a large portion of the effect when we look at that. Cognitive skills, nothing, and psychosocial skills, explaining some portion. And for college completion, smaller mediating roles, this occurs further away from the time that these mediators are measured. And here, psychosocial skills does just a little, and for stratum 2. Okay, so as we mentioned, wanted to look at the sensitivity results, sensitivity analyses for the total and the mediation effects. There's a lot of numbers that are involved in looking at different thresholds for those delta and gamma parameters. So what I do here is just summarize the findings that the effects of divorce on education among children who had a low to moderate propensity are highly robust to unobserved confounding. So they held out quite well So if we assumed an unobserved confounder, let's say it's some kind of indicator of father's employment status, which has been shown to be a strong indicator of that we don't observe in our data. So to invalidate the results on, let's say, high school completion, we would need to assume that father's full-time employment differed by about 5% between divorced and non-divorced parents, and then it would need to differ by 40% for high school completion, so that children whose fathers are full-time employed had a 40% advantage in graduating high school to invalidate the results that we see. So that seems pretty robust. For college attendance and college completion, it exceeds 40%. And we could look at, that full-time employment status differed by 10% between divorced and non-divorced kids, and then I think we're looking at needs to be a 30% effect or something. So, and then the mediation effects, the family income mediation effect was quite robust at confounding relationship transitions and psychosocial skills was more sensitive. So smaller values of these thresholds moved the effects to non-significance. Okay, so a summary, we know that children whose parents divorced tend to have lower levels of educational attainment than parents who stay together. There's some tendency to assume that it's kind of uniformly negative. Here we find, we carefully attend to the assumptions needed to estimate total mediation effects, and we find significant effects of divorce on children's educational attainment. Those with a low to moderate likelihood, no effects of children's education for those with a high likelihood of divorce. Our sensitivity analysis indicate that the total effects are highly robust to confounding. Mediation effects divorce are overwhelmingly due to declines in family income among those who have this significant effect. Some portion seems to be also due to family transitions and psychosocial skills, while cognitive skills do not account for the effects, although this, again, is more sensitive to unobserved confounding. And so, one final note on just these. Despite even the sensitivity analysis, we always kind of push that our results should be viewed with caution, that divorce is a highly selective process. We can't possibly account for all the factors that influences parents who choose to end their marriages, and particularly among those children who are unlikely to experience a divorce, there are potentially more self-selective factors that influence that effect. So the conclusion is, so it's implausible to assume that children respond identically to family disruption. The impact depends upon the context in which it occurs. Families prone to disruption have high levels of family and socioeconomic hardship, a social context in which family shocks and economic stress are normative experiences. When divorce is but one of many disadvantaged conditions, the effects of any particular event seem to be rendered less severe, and I found the same kind of thing looking at parental job loss and the effects on children. So educational rates, attainment rates among children whose parents have a high probability of divorce are relatively low, and these rates are roughly the same whether or not their parents are married or divorced. For others, family disruption may come as a considerable shock, instituting an acute sense of deprivation among children whose parents are unlikely to divorce and otherwise lead more privileged lives and have a more profound impact upon their educational trajectories. Overwhelmingly, this seems to be the result of the decline in family income. So the last note here is just while the effect of divorce is seemingly greatest among children of more advantaged families, it's not to say that we want to shift attention away from the children of disadvantaged families. In fact, I find it telling that educational attainment among high propensity children is unaffected by parental divorce, suggesting that discourse aimed at promoting marital stability among disadvantaged families without attending to these socioeconomic and conditions and expectations of distress is at least potentially misguided. I'll end it there.